Elliotte, as you and I talked about on radio the other day, this is not the end of anything, but the end of the beginning of something. The June 2018 sexual assault involving the 2018 Canadian World Junior Hockey Team. 5 players have been instructed by London police to surrender in association and in connection with the alleged sexual assault. What do we know right now? We anticipate certainly a press conference on the 5th by London police, but where is the story at right now?
Obviously, Jeff, this is a seismic time for all the wrong reasons. It's a very, very sad story, and I think one we all wish did not exist. I thought we would hear something a few times after last season. Around the draft, there was a lot of noise that we would get some clarity, and we didn't. Around training camp, there was a lot of noise that we would get some clarity, and we didn't. And, if any time Commissioner Bettman would have an availability, he would be asked about it, and he would say things along the lines of, we're getting there. And I think once he said, hopefully we're closer to the end, but we don't have anything to announce or say at this time. And finally, I had the chance to sit down with one person who has a lot to do with what's going on. And what they told me was it was going to be very hard to get any closure without legal charges, because I think that it was made very clear that if anything was put out into the public sphere without proof, there would be legal ramifications, lawsuit, something like that. I was basically just told without criminal charges, it was going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to move the situation along or get any clarity or closure. For example, with Hockey Canada in particular, they have a report done. It's in its appeal process. Hockey Canada took a lot of criticism for the way they handled this at the beginning. They didn't handle it very well, very poorly, as we all know now, and there was a firestorm of criticism because of it. It had a massive effect on them financially. They lost sponsors. It damaged the entire organization, the name, the brand. People lost their jobs and reputations were destroyed. And Jeff, if you'll remember, there was one time in the aftermath, I was very critical of someone on this pod for something that they did. And a friend of theirs called me to complain. And I told him that that was my opinion and I wasn't changing it. But the one thing I got from that conversation was there was definitely a feeling in Hockey Canada that not everybody who was responsible that night had paid the same price, and that there was a feeling that they wanted to get their report out so that the full details would be known. But because of the legal concerns and the appeal process, but the legal concerns too, at the time, that was before the appeal process, they just weren't going to be able to do it. Now, Shane Pinto, which obviously isn't the same thing, but if you look how it was adjudicated, it was a 41-game suspension, an agreement of no appeal. The suspension was announced, he served the penalty, and now he's back playing. Again, it's nowhere near the same thing, but it was an example of how something could be adjudicated relatively cleanly. He accepted the punishment, there was no appeal, that was it. That was not going to be the case with this situation, sadly. They knew that anything they tried to do without proof, there was going to be a big fight. So I think that's why this was taking so long in the last few months. I think there were times everybody thought it was close, but in the absence of criminal charges or the potential of criminal charges, there was a concern about a penalty, laying a penalty, or going public with anything. Well, now we know it looks like on February 5th, there are going to be charges laid. And, we should mention that the London police tweet that alerted us to the media conference says anticipate. So I'm always careful with that. We'll see what happens at that time. And you still have to be careful. A few lawyers I know, they warn me, look, if you're talking about it in the next few days, be very, very careful what you say until the charges are actually laid, because there's a lot of circumstance that we can guess at, but you don't know for sure, and don't guess. This is not the time to guess. And the other thing, too, is, in the aftermath of what happened with Kyle Beach, Jeff, we underwent a lot of training about how you should handle these situations and what's the proper way to approach them. And one of the things that was really told to us many, many times was always, respect the wishes, such as they are, what we know of the victim or the people involved. And the victim in this case has done one interview with Robin Doolittle of the Globe and Mail, where she's quoted as saying she's not comfortable with how public all of this has become. So I've always kept that in mind too. Don't guess, don't say anything that you don't know, because that's also the wishes of the victim the one time that she has been quoted. So that I've always kept in my mind. So, February 5th is obviously going to be a big day again for all the wrong reasons. And I would assume we're going to get a better idea of what the charges are and also what some of the ramifications will be. Again, because Hockey Canada's report is in the appeal process, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to hear from them, but I assume we're going to hear from the NHL. They will probably wait for the official announcement before they announce any suspensions or penalties, such as they are, and also the teams too. Once the teams hear what could happen, will their owners want their general managers or organizations to act in a certain way? So unless any other stories come out before then, that's going to be the big day for when we're going to have an idea of where this is headed.
Okay, a couple of things that I want to add to that, Elliotte, and one, just a further note of clarification on something as well. The Hockey Canada report and the NHL report. Now, we discussed this on the radio show the other day as well. And for those that didn't hear, I want to share it here as well, because they may have heard the exact same thing. There were some who believed that the reports, part of the reason the reports didn't come out from Hockey Canada or the NHL was there was a fear of prejudicing in some ways the London police investigation itself. How much of that, if any, do you know to be true?
I don't know that, Jeff. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just don't know. The thing that was explained to me a lot was, like I said, there was just concern about if you put something out there that didn't turn out to be true, you could face a lawsuit or legal ramifications. That was what was told to me was the biggest hurdle. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just didn't hear that as much.
The other thing too, in the spirit of respect the victim's wishes through a lot of things as well, I think there's a couple of things that I would just like to add, just to keep in mind too. Certainly in this situation, we think plenty about the victim here. In this situation too, there are other people in the hockey universe that are going to be impacted by this that I think we should be mindful of as well, whether it's team employees, whether it's women specifically who have, perhaps been victims themselves, will find this an increasingly challenging environment to work in. And, a lot of hockey fans as well have either been victims themselves or certainly know victims as well. Like, we're going into a very, very awful time. And I would just like to think that as much as, everybody will follow the story and follow where the facts go, we should always keep in mind to the victim in this case, but other people who are impacted by it and the coverage of it. So if we could just, I think, if I can just make a small appeal, Elliotte, just try to be thoughtful of everybody here, because this is about to be good for nobody.
I agree with everything you said there, Jeff. That's extremely well said. Look, I'm far from a perfect human being, but I always try to treat people respectfully. This is going to be a very, very difficult time. We don't know what the future holds exactly, but we all know it's going to be hard and it's going to be sad, and no one is going to benefit from it. I wish nobody would have to go through this. Nobody.
You're right, Elliotte. I couldn't agree more. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, 32 Thoughts, the podcast. Welcome once again to 32 Thoughts, the podcast, presented as always by the GMC Sierra. Jeff Merrick, Elliotte Friedman, Dom Shermatti, along with you. We have a lot to get to today, whether it is Utah, Elliotte, whether it is the Los Angeles Kings, Elliotte, whether it is the Ottawa Senators, Elliotte, whether it is, and we'll start here, Patrick Roy and the New York Islanders in Montreal on Thursday nights. Quite the evening. It opened up beautifully. As we've said before, I've always made this point. There are two places in the world where they do celebrations properly. One is Buckingham Palace. The other is the Bell Center. And we saw that, Elliotte, during the national anthem, the video montage. Patrick Roy, I think, tried to hold it together and didn't do a very good job. No one could hold it together when you put something like that together. Your thoughts on, before we get to the game itself, your thoughts on the montage, the tribute to Patrick at the Bell Center.
Well, I think everybody realized this week that the game of hockey is better when Patrick Roy is involved, and nobody recognizes that more than the fans here in Montreal. A raucous ovation for him when they started showing pictures of him on the video board during the national anthem, and the standing ovation that continued through the end of the anthem and almost to the opening faceoff tonight.
Did you see Roy at the end of the anthem?
Yeah.
He kind of swallows a little bit. And
oh, yeah.
Like, it got to him.
Well, did you
really got to him in a good way. In a good way.
In a really good way. But did you see what he tried to do to get his attention off it? Right away, it was like fist bumps to the assistant coach. Okay, come on, let's get into this. It's like, no one's buying it. No one's buying it. It's okay to be, that kind of emotional about a moment like that.
Those things can be really tough. Some players have told me before, because especially if it's about you or someone you're really close with, you really have trouble focusing on the game. Like, Jeff, when we think about Patrick Roy and emotional, we think about fiery nature. We think about passion. We don't think about sentimental. Like, there's not a lot of sentimental Patrick Roy out there. Like, the day he retires and the great question, who was the player on a breakaway that really scared you? And he's like, no one. Like, even on the day he retires, he's not giving it up.
Defiant.
The defiant Patrick Roy. But in that moment, for one of the few times, you see him look really sentimental, how much that meant to him. And the thing I thought about when I was looking at him is, Marty St. Louis got a big future there, and I think he's going to do a great job there and win a lot there. But you kind of have to look at that and imagine, what would it be like if Patrick was coaching the Montreal Canadiens?
I know. We all thought it, Elliotte.
Game 42, they're booing him after a 2-1 loss. But, I couldn't help but think about it. And then the team came out and just laid an absolute egg in the first couple of minutes, although they came back and tied it. Tough loss in regulation. I think the other thing I really liked about the day in Montreal, I was disappointed when I heard the Islanders weren't doing a morning skate. I was really disappointed when I heard that, because I understand Lou Lamoriello, the team is bigger than the individual, and But Patrick Waugh coaching in Montreal after all these years.
I know.
So I was at least happy there was an early media conference, and it was a good media conference. So I was glad there was something, because I thought we really lost something
Elliotte.
initially by them not being there in the morning.
Do you ever associate sentimentality with Lou Lamoriello, Elliotte?
Well, we'll call this the unsentimental duo, Waugh and Lamoriello. But, we are, you don't have to sell Patrick Waugh in Montreal. I'm sure every ticket was sold. But at least we got that media conference. Because initially I was like, really? But at least we got that media conference.
We did, and we got a very interesting game. We got a very exciting game. We got a very controversial game. And a quick couple of thoughts before we got to that, furious ending sequence to this one. Your thoughts on Brendan Gallagher on Adam Pelech? Pelech did obviously not look very good, going off. The high hit from Gallagher, the 5 in the game, and we suspect a knock on the door from George Parros.
Well, look, as we tape this pod, we have not seen a notification yet. Brendan Gallagher's never been suspended. I believe he's been fined once. But the only question for me is this in person or not? And, we talked on the last podcast about Yanni Gourde, the suspension that he got. Yep. I was surprised he got 2 games, but then you realize there was an injury involved, and he'd been suspended once before. There is an injury involved here, and Pelech is already returning from a concussion earlier this season. So what you're looking at here for Gallagher is a dirty play that is the kind of play the NHL really targets. And 2, and we'll see how it plays out, there's an injury. So to me, the only question is in person or not. And reminder, for in person, they have the option to suspend for more than 5.
Yes, and it was that penalty that allowed the Islanders to jump back into the game. Power play goals by Matt Barzal and Kyle Palmieri, and we were all thinking, wow, the Islanders have got this into overtime. But then cue the heroics, Sean Monahan with his second goal of the game, and the Montreal Canadiens end up winning this one by a final score of 4-3. That was quite the closing sequence at the Bell Center on Thursday night, Elliotte.
Sean Monahan is a really interesting case, because I've noticed there's this big debate online about, do the Canadiens get a first-round pick for Sean Monahan? Well, there's a couple things I look at here. I would say that A, it depends on how many teams are interested, and B, it also depends on, what the chances are of a team being interested to re-sign him. I would say that baseline, he's probably not a guy they're going to get a first rounder for, unless a team wants to extend him or there's such a race for him that it pushes it up into that first round range. I think the most interesting thing I heard about Monahan is, first of all, there is a lot of respect for him. When you think of the kinds of things that he's come back from, and how he's still playing after his body basically broke down, people really admire his passion for the game. That this is a guy who really loves hockey. So people really respect that about him. The critique I heard about him is that how high is a Stanley Cup contender? It's not even really a critique about him. It's just about roster building. Is how high can a Stanley Cup contender put him in the lineup? Like, if you're looking for a second line center on a really good team, and you look at who you're going to face in the playoffs night in and night out, not sure that that's the guy. Like Vancouver, for example, I don't know that if you're looking to put someone in between, say, the 6-4-9 line, if they stay together, and Teddy Bluger, I'm not sure for that spot. I'm not sure that he's their guy. That's why I think Vancouver's looking at more like Lindholm or Adam Henrique, guys like that who can obviously everyone knows Gensel, but Lindholm or Adam Henrique, guys who can sort of move around your lineup. I think if you're looking for a really good third line center and you don't need him to take a top six role, I know there's a couple of teams who think that's a more perfect spot for him. But what he's doing is impressive. He's up to, 33 points? He's having a really good year.
It would be a wild story, too, if they do end up somehow getting a first rounder for Sean Monahan. Then we can say they got a first rounder for taking him and got a first rounder for trading him. Would make him one of the more interesting players in recent memory around the NHL. Another dangerous hit on Thursday night, Elliotte, in the Calgary-Columbus game. Jonathan Huberdeau with a bad one. Catches Jack Roslovic from behind, headfirst into the glass. Boone Jenner comes in. You can see Huberdeau's face right away like, ugh, I didn't mean to do that, but nonetheless, he did that.
Well, also, it's not the same level as Gallagher.
No.
At least it's not a good play, as you're right. Like, Huberdeau has to ease up there. It's right from behind. But at least he's doing it in the context of, trying to make a play. The Gallagher one is in another universe. But, yeah, he got ejected, and we'll see where this one goes. Huberdeau also not a guy with a dangerous reputation or a dirty reputation.
No, not at
but he deserved the 5 minutes, and you hope Jack Roslovic is okay.
Okay, so Patrick Roy, the gift that keeps on giving. He's the Christmas morning story. We'll still be talking about Patrick Roy, I'm sure, at the same time next week. Elliott's. Nothing Patrick Roy does is quiet. And usually everything is a headline. And there's a few more headlines we should probably go over here. Oh, by the way, here's what I wanted to mention. Last week on the podcast, we were talking about which game in specific had the most Hall of Famers involved in it, and wondering, I wonder what game that could be.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know who came to our rescue?
Who's that?
E.J. Raddick.
Really?
Sent me a text with the answer, and the answer is 19. 19 players
19?
In one specific game. 1956 Stanley Cup Final, Game 5, Detroit, Montreal, 19 Hall of Famers. Now, Al Arbor was in the game. He later went into the Hockey Hall of Fame as a coach.
Well, he's still in the Hall of Fame.
He's still in the Hall of Fame. But E.J. Raddick, great job, bud. We checked it out too. EJ's right on the money. 1956 Stanley Cup Final, Game 5, Detroit, Montreal. 19 Hall of Famers, Elliotte, in that game. EJ Raddick, you are, as we say in French, comme on dit en français, la première étoile, the first star. Thanks for coming through with that one.
By the way, I have another answer to something from last week's pod, but we'll do it at the end of the segment. So just remind me.
Looking forward to that one very much. Very good. Very good. Okay, let's focus on the LA Kings here for a while. Things are not going, what's the word I'm looking for? Good for the Los Angeles Kings.
They are ungood.
Ungood. Losers of 12 of their last 14 games. Hey, it's Anse Kopitar night, celebrating a number of different accomplishments for the captain of the Los Angeles Kings. Hey, look, the Los Angeles Kings.
By the way, that was a great little ceremony.
I loved it. Listen, I loved everything about the ceremony. I loved the way that Darrell Evans was dressed for the occasion as well. He looked fantastic. The Los Angeles Kings go up 3-1 at the end of 20 minutes against the Buffalo Sabres. It's cruise control. The Kings are back. This is awesome. And they surrender 4 goals in a row. Afterwards, Drew Doughty did not mince words, talking about how we went up 3-1, and I'm paraphrasing here, some players just thought that this was a points night, it was a cookie night.
I think we got guys in this room who are too worried about themselves and worried about their points and worried about stuff like that. We get a 3-1 lead tonight, and guys start thinking it's a cookie night, and we stop playing the way we know how to play, have an awful second period, and then aren't much better in the third.
Todd McClellan, both angry dad and disappointed dad at the same time as well. They head off for a 3-game road trip before their little break. They face off against Colorado, St. Louis, and then Nashville. Then they have a pause. Your thoughts on what Los Angeles is going through right now? This is not the team we saw at the beginning of the season, Elliotte.
No, it's definitely not. That looked like an absolute Stanley Cup contender, a team that was going to be a nightmare to deal with, even in a really tough division.
Made Engels look smart. Remember Erik Engels?
Smart. Well, you know what? That's probably what undid them as much as anything else, is that Erik Engels was on their bandwagon. They had no chance with that. Although, again, this year my predictions have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, physician heal thyself.
When that happens with Doughty, it's like when it happened with Devon Toews in Colorado.
Yes.
It's never coming out to the media without first being internal. So what that's telling you is internally, they've been hammering each other about this. This has been an issue internally for some time. And now Drew Doughty is like, I'm disgusted and I don't care, and it's boiling over. Yep. It's almost like in any relationship that goes sour, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom to get it back, right? And that was rock bottom in Drew Doughty's mind, so he's putting it out there. Now, all these guys, like people are guessing, is he talking about, because you know what it does? It's like the guys who get points, right? Like, is he talking about Kempe or is he talking about Fiala? Like, who's he talking about? So now people are guessing, are absolutely guessing. And
always healthy.
Always healthy. Because
if
it's not you and people are guessing you, you're like, what did I do to deserve this? Why am I catching this stray? Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Now, look, I think obviously a lot of this is focusing on Dubois, and especially because McClellan called him out basically in a reasonably polite way, but he did call him out. He said, "The guy's got to be better. It's time. We cannot wait for Pierre-Luc Dubois anymore." And the thing about Pierre-Luc Dubois, I, in my life, have the right to switch jobs as I see fit. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, as per the CBA, has the right to use the CBA to his advantage as much as he can. Okay? Mm-hmm. But what's your line? Dogs never bark at parked cars?
No. Yeah, dogs don't bark at parked cars.
That's right. So when you put yourself out there like that, and especially the way, Columbus traded him after he had that shift where he didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And Winnipeg traded him when, he said, I'm not going to sign there long-term, which again is his right. You piss off people and people start rooting against you. People out there can have this debate about whether or not that's right or that's fair, but that's the way it is. That's the way it works. And there's no question people are having their schadenfreude on Dubois right now. And the people who don't like him, they are loving this. Now, my interest in this is purely, okay, what's going on here? He's better than this. He is a much, much better player than this. And what someone told me is, and this is someone who's seen a lot of Dubois over the years, is that the word on him is when he wants to play, he's a difference maker. He changes games.
Oh, yeah.
He is exactly what the LA Kings hoped they were getting on this 8-year deal. The problem is, and this is what someone said to me about Dubois, is that he takes nights off where he's not into it as much. Mm-hmm. And it can be very frustrating. It frustrated Columbus and it frustrated Winnipeg. And the problem now is that when you're on this salary, you cannot take that many games off. Like nobody plays 84. How many games do we play now, Jeff? 82?
Elliotte, 82.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for your help. Nobody can play 82 perfect games. It's not humanly possible. No. But when you're a team's top player, your percentage of games that aren't very good, especially when things aren't going well,
Yeah.
It has to be very, very low. And when your team is struggling, it basically has to be zero. Because people look at you and say, you're one of our highest paid players. We need you out here. And that's what this person said to me, is that, the contract is the contract. You're worth what someone is willing to pay you. But the more you get paid, the more the pressure ratchets up. And when you're that guy that the team goes out and get and says, this is the final piece, which is essentially what the LA Kings did, it's a double whammy. Now you really can't have too many nights off. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, in his history, teams who had him felt he has more nights off than you need from an absolute core star player. And that is what Dubois is going to have to change.
When you look at this Los Angeles Kings team, a team that is right now in free fall as they hit the road, as I mentioned, Colorado, St. Louis, Nashville. Composition or coaching is always the question we ask about any situation. What do you think the issue is here? And what do you think LA does about it?
Look, I think if they really wanted to make a change, they could have made it on Thursday. I don't think they want to make a coaching change. I think that they believe that one of the reasons they were floundering a couple years ago, right? They weren't where they wanted to be in their rebuild.
Yep.
And McLellan comes in, he installs a structure, and they make the playoffs. 2 years ago, they lose in 7 games to the Oilers. They make the playoffs last year. They lose in 6 games to the Oilers. Now, but they believe that he was creating a structure that, people were picking them for the Stanley Cup this year. Erik wasn't the only one.
Yep.
There were questions in goal, but their roster and the way they played, I think they look at him and said he was a big reason for that. So I think they want to reward that. But, I'll tell you, this week in the NBA, Jeff, there was a coach who was fired in his first season. He was 30-13. I think they were the 3rd best team in the league. Adrian Griffin, his name, is coaching the Milwaukee Bucks. Now,
is Lou Lamoriello the GM of that team too?
It's actually really funny. Now I haven't read enough about it. Obviously, there's been a lot going on this week, more serious. But so I haven't had a chance to read a lot about it. But someone said to me that there's going to be a team that looks at this in hockey, and they're going to say, this NBA team just did this. And you look at all the bounces we've had so far. John Hines initially, Chris Knobloch initially, although that I believe is as much health as anything else. Someone looked at me and said, there's going to be a GM or an owner in the NHL who's going to look at that 30-13 coach getting fired and saying, you know what? Sometimes record be damned. We got to do what, or the way it looks be damned, or history be damned. We got to be a bit more cutthroat. And, but I really do think the Kings say a lot of the gains they've made structure-wise are because of McLellan. And I think they really don't want to change that unless they absolutely have to.
Anything else on LA?
A couple more things I wonder here. Do they kind of unleash Clark a little bit more? Like right now,
Brant Clark. So our listeners,
Yes.
Brant Clark, the defenseman. Okay.
Like the fans out there are wondering, Clark and Spence, they never play together really. And I don't think coaches are trying to sabotage themselves. I always think that there's a reason that they're doing what they are. But I wonder if you get to a point where you simply say, all right, time to try something a little bit different. I wonder if you get there. I just want to see Clark more because I'm fascinated by him as a player. Like that's what it. Like I see the numbers he put up in the American Hockey League this year.
Oh yeah.
I want to see more of it at the NHL level. But again, I don't think coaches sabotage themselves. I think they have a reason, but sometimes circumstances force you into changing your reasons.
Elliotte, can I be that guy?
Okay.
Can I be that guy that says things like this? I saw him play for the Don Mills Flyers in the GTHL. I saw him play for the Barrie Colts of the OHL. If he's even remotely close at the NHL level to what I saw in the GTHL and the OHL, Elliotte, look out. You're going to have a lot of fun watching this guy. Last year when he went back to the OHL, it was so clear. It was so clear that he had completely outgrown the league and was ready for his next challenge. If LA gets anything close to that defenseman, look out. Mm-hmm. He's so much fun to watch. You're bang on. He's so much fun to watch. Thank you for letting me be that guy on the podcast. Okay, a couple of other things here. Erik Johnson and the Buffalo Sabres. You know, Buffalo is the opponent for the Los Angeles Kings the other night, where things went south. And I think we're wondering, about the future of the Buffalo Sabres. What is the thought on the coaching staff? What is the thought on the general manager? What is the thought on trade deadline? What is the thought on the goalie situation? What's the thought on Erik Johnson?
I have to. So I've started to hear his name a little bit. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to me. Erik Johnson is on a 1-year contract. He is a couple years, and not at a big number, 3.25. So it's manageable, yep. And you'd also be willing to see what Buffalo's willing to do. And he's only a couple years removed from a Stanley Cup championship. Mm-hmm. Really good team guy, keeps himself in great shape, loves, like we're talking about Monahan, really loves hockey. I just had some people say, watch this one. There's going to be interest in Erik Johnson. And unfortunately for the Sabres, it's not going to work out this year. You know how teams out there feel. This is the kind of guy they love adding for the playoffs.
Totally.
Winning reputation, easy fit in your dressing room. You know, the other thing someone said to me is because he's been in the Western Conference all this time and switched to the East, you know, he's a guy who understands both conferences. Like you talk about the adjustment from East to West or West to East, yes, and how the conferences are different. You don't worry about that with Erik Johnson because he's been in this one after playing in the other one for a long time. You know, to me, so I think this is a name to watch. Like I said, I just had a couple people say to me, put Erik, and he's a right-hand shot, and they just said, put Erik Johnson on your radar. The Sabres are going to have some options here.
Interesting. Also in that same division, the Ottawa Senators, and they had a very interesting Thursday morning, specifically. Steve Staios, general manager, giving
Erik
an update.
Johnson's a pro. He's a pro,
but
he probably wants to go somewhere for the Stanley Cup this year.
I really believe that. But, you know, pros are what, and veterans are what the Ottawa Senators are very much looking for to complement the group that they have right now, according to general manager Steve Staios. A couple of things about this presser. And, you know, Patrick Waugh's name was discussed. Jacob Chikrin was discussed. The core was discussed. Vlad Tarasenko was discussed. The one thing that has always struck me about Steve Staios, when I hear him speak publicly, it almost seems, Elliotte, as if he's determined not to be that guy on Twitter ever. Not going to give anyone that 20-second soundbite that's going to be all over Twitter. He's very calm. He's very measured. He's very deliberate. We know that he's a very thoughtful guy as well. But what were some of your takeaways from the Steve Staios State of the Union address on Thursday?
Well, I think that goes to what we've talked about, that they just generally want to calm the noise in Ottawa. That it goes back to what we talked, like the Senators players saying there's too much craziness there. So number one, I think Staios was a player. And what's one of the things you got upset about? That Chikrin's name was out there. That's very player-esque, right? A lot of the GMs who are former players, like Ron Hextall, like Ron Hextall, people didn't like his secrecy. He told me once that's why he was so secret, because he knew what it was like to have your name out there, and he didn't like it. And Staios strikes me as because he referred to that directly. He's a former player. He's saying, you know what? He doesn't like that. So I think that has a lot to do with it. But also it's, hey, I just don't want to pour any gasoline on the fire. There's been too much of it here lately.
Right. You know, it's interesting when he talked about not liking Jacob Chikrin's name out there. Did you not get, because he kind of walked right up to this line. I was half expecting him to say how, disappointed he was in other general managers for, whispering that, the Ottawa Senators were talking about Jacob Chikrin. He kind of walked up to that line, but never quite crossed it. But, the Chikrin thing is interesting. I think that there was a lot of interest around the Michael Andlauer interview en français, in French, and his intimations about Patrick Roy and the timing of everything and how that didn't work for the Ottawa Senators. Did you have a thought on the conversation around, here we are talking about Patrick Roy again, about Patrick Roy and the Ottawa Senators?
Well, what was his quote? The timing isn't right?
Yes.
So I think what that's about is, what have we talked about? That the Senators have said publicly and privately, we have to get this coaching hire right. We have to get it right. Now, as much as we all love Roy, and what's happening this week, how would you feel if the Ottawa Senators were told, you've got to hire Patrick Roy right now and you can't talk to anybody else? Or you have to move up your hiring process now, so anyone you talk to has to be available for now. Although really, if you're going for Roy right now, like, let's just say Roy said he was offered the job Friday. So let's just say it's last Wednesday, and Patrick Roy calls you and says, look, I could be going somewhere else. Do you want me? What that said to me was, the Ottawa Senators, if that was presented to them, they weren't doing it. They were like, that's not enough of a search.
To me, it said that, similar to what you're saying, is they want to talk to a lot of people that they're not allowed to talk to right now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's obvious. That's so obvious, I left it to you and wasn't even going to say it.
Well, that's my job on this podcast here, to play the, wait a minute, Elliotte, are you trying to tell us that blank, 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 blank? I think it's interesting too. And, the sort of undercurrent of everything in Ottawa when it comes to coaching, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well, is Craig Berube. And we all know the association with Craig Berube and Dave Poulin, former teammates. Poulin has talked openly and flatteringly about Craig Berube, and so we say to ourselves, okay, if Berube comes in, it's a Dave Poulin decision, and that very well may be true. But one of the things that I wonder when it comes to Craig Berube, Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues, as much as it may be an association with Dave Poulin, and again here, I'm not saying that a player is making a coaching decision. All I'm saying is this player, through his father, is well acquainted with Craig Berube, and Berube knows the family very well. That would be a very big Brady Tkachuk move as well.
Let me ask you something. Mm-hmm. In this case, do you think that's a plus or a minus?
I assume it's a plus. Do you not?
I actually had this debate with someone the other day. And first of all, let me just say, because actually I said it's obviously a plus. And someone said to me, I don't think it is. And it's someone who I think is very smart. I said, why don't you think that that's a good thing? Like, to me, it's obvious. And he said, first of all, I think Craig Berube is an excellent coach. I said, okay. Keith Tkachuk and DJ Smith had an excellent relationship. And he said, if you're trying to change things up there and trying to push the players to go to the next level, would you want that same kind of thing or would you want something different? And I kind of laughed and I said, do you think that Keith Tkachuk could tell Craig Berube what to do? I said, I actually think Craig Berube could be one of the few people that could could stuff Keith Tkachuk into a locker. But he said, he said, no, he says, like, if I was the manager, I don't know if I'd do it. And like, I don't know how the Senators feel about this. And as you said, Dave Poulin said really nice things about Craig Berube before, and he's got a lot of respect. But I just wanted to, when you mentioned that, I just wanted to put it out there because I just thought it was an interesting perspective. Like, he said there's a lot of people in hockey who know the Tkachuks and like the Tkachuks, and they deserve it. They're great hockey players and a great family. But he just wondered, would you go for a second coach who was really tight with the family?
Two more things from the Staios presser that I want to go over with you quickly here. One, the Vlad Tarasenko question, and he said, yes, of course, we all know he's an impending unrestricted free agent, trade deadline's on the horizon, and he said he hasn't had any conversations with Vlad Tarasenko or his representatives. But then, I'm curious how you see this one. To me, he went into shine Vlad Tarasenko for trade deadline mode and started talking about what a great player he is and how good he is with the organization and how he's a two-way guy and so helpful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's never lose sight of the fact that, Vlad Tarasenko was not signed by Steve Staios. That was a Pierre Dorian signing for the Ottawa Senators. It was almost as if, I'm not sure if you got the same feeling, Elliotte, he went into this mode of I'm shining up a player here for trade deadline. This is me talking publicly about how great Vlad Tarasenko is, with the hopes that someone will bite a trade deadline on him. Now he has a no trade, so I understand, but still, did you get that same feeling when he talked about Tarasenko?
Oh yeah. But also, like I said, Staios is an ex-player. He's not going to publicly dump on players.
No, he's not. The other thing...
Unless you really make him mad.
Yes, and we've seen coaches do that. And we just talked about the Los Angeles Kings, Elliotte. One final thing, and I thought, and maybe this is just semantics here, but I don't know. My ears perk up when I hear things like this, and maybe you do as well. He talked about how they're still evaluating the core. And I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but I kind of took that as... we know who the core is, we just don't know how married we are to them. Did you hear that the same way?
Yes, and I think that's a change from even as recently as last month. I think a couple of things have happened. Number one, and it's the key, Chychrun's up for a new deal after this year, and to me, that more than anything else is the reason his name has gotten out there, is that, Shabbat is signed long-term. Sanderson is signed long-term. Chychrun is not signed long-term. And I do believe that the Senators are looking for an experienced defenseman. I think that's part of, like when he's talking about I'm looking for a pro, I think he's looking for a pro on the blue line and not just someone who's there, I'm a great guy, like someone who can play. I think that's one of his shopping lists. And those can cost you. But what it comes down to is if Chychrun prices himself out of Ottawa in a year from now, either he's going to have to go or someone else is going to have to go. Like that's just the reality of the situation. So when he said, and also sometimes too, like I do think obviously he's an ex-player and he wants to limit the noise around them, but he doesn't want them to be entirely comfortable. And that's his way of saying, I would like them all to be here, but if they don't play like we should all be here, then we'll make changes. It's that simple. So it's the cap and player performance.
That was a really interesting press conference. I'm very intrigued by Steve Staios. I really am. Okay, so that is Ottawa. Anything else before we get on to what we all believe is a really juicy story here with a lot of tentacles? Anything else before we get to Ryan Smith in Utah?
Well, we should mention the return of Miro Heiskanen in Dallas and a Thomas Harley breakout night, the overtime game winner. and 23 minutes just under played. Dallas is obviously a very different team with Heiskanen in the lineup. And I actually think one of the biggest races in the NHL this year is going to be first place in the Central Division. Now, right now,
yes.
Winnipeg has the top points percentage at .707. Like, it's going to be those three teams, 1, 2, or 3. Like Nashville and St. Louis, they're not catching those three teams.
No.
But you've got Winnipeg at 707 and Colorado and Dallas, just behind them. But Winnipeg has the one team with games in hand. You do not want to finish second or third in that division. You want to finish first in that division. And we're still waiting for injury news on Josh Morrissey, who got hurt the other night in Toronto. So, that's one thing that stood out to me. We should mention Oliver Shillington's return in Calgary. He came back, played his first game. They put him in the starting lineup. Great ovation.
So good.
From the Calgary fans. The only thing I didn't like about that game, bad injury for AJ Greer, who's played really well for them. He went into the boards and had one of those Moise Alou style injuries. Just
not good.
Gross and painful. So you hope he's okay. And the other thing we should mention was a weird situation. 2 pucks tonight fired into the bench, accidentally injuring people. Travis Green had to coach the third period for New Jersey because Lindy Ruff was hit by a puck and was taken out. And then Cole Sillinger's shot hits Adam Boqvist, and Boqvist has to leave the game. Just strange coincidence. On a really tough night for the Devils, Vanacek got knocked out early. You're missing Hughes and you're missing Hamilton. That's a lot. There's not a lot of teams that can overcome that. And I'll tell you, I'm watching this game in goal for New Jersey. It's another rough night for them in net, and I just checked out Akira Schmid, and Jeff, this at the end of the year there's going to be a big essay to get done on goaltenders because Akira Schmid last year, he beats the Rangers in the first round and he looks like a real stud. And, he's really struggling this year. His AHL numbers are not very good. This has been one of the strangest seasons ever it's like goalies are Superman and there's all sorts of kryptonite around. And some of it's the green kryptonite that temporarily takes away your powers and you eventually recover. And some of it, you're like, is this the gold kryptonite where you just never recover? You never get your powers back. And, it's really like Samsonov looks like he's never going to play again. And all of a sudden he's won 2 games in a row and the fans are giving him an ovation. It's just been a wild year in that. And New Jersey's really going I'll really say it again. I think that if the Devils make a short-term play and goal, maybe you think you have to do it for ticket sales or whatever. But I'm going long term if I'm them. If I'm going for a goalie, I'm going for someone who's got some term.
I had a really interesting text conversation with someone this morning about goaltenders, and this person brought up an incredible point to me, and this is, I believe, so true. One of the most important things for a team right now, given this nature of a lot of goaltenders are hot one year, cold another year, the unpredictability of them, etc. And this person that I was texting with brought up an incredible point. And this is someone who's in the NHL orbit, let's just say, said to me, one of the great things a team can have that you guys never talk about is having a goalie coach who has the ability to recognize in a goaltender that this is someone that we know we can improve, that they can recognize the areas where improvement is needed and know that they can get and know that they have the ability to get to that next level. He said, if you don't have someone that can do that in your organization, you're going to be forever at the whims of, I guess, what we've always called goaltender voodoo, and wondered like, okay, is it going to be the good year for this guy or the bad year for this guy? Again, it was just one conversation, but I've kind of been thinking about it all day. Let me swing back to another thing you said a couple of seconds ago with the Dallas Stars. You know who looks really good? You know who looks really good playing with Jason Robertson and Rupe Hintz? Wyatt Johnson looks so good on that line, Elliotte.
First he stole Pavelski's house, now he's stealing his line mates.
I know. It's so true. It's so true. Okay, let's get to
And we should also shout out the Carolina Hurricanes for their Mums storm surge post-game.
Very. I did love, by the way, even before that, the other day, seeing Brady Shea's mom read out the starting lineup. That was a great touch. I love it. I'm a sucker for all that stuff. That was awesome.
Now before we get to expansion, there's one last thing. So in our last,
a lot of last things. Jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the questions we asked was about what happens if there's a draft snafu. Okay.
Yes.
So I had a couple of notes about this. I had one person say to me, here's the way it goes, because you didn't explain it entirely correctly, which is kind of my way of doing things. You submit the pick electronically, and they call you to confirm the player they received. So there is actually an opportunity to fix it if you submit the wrong name. It's after that they tell you to go ahead, and that's why sometimes the clock can go below zero, because you can put the pick in with 10 seconds left and have 45 seconds go by before they call you and then signal the stage so it's done. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, that does not eradicate human error. Now, you know Andy Chiodo, right?
Goaltender.
So someone said to me, there's only one player who's been drafted 3 times, and it's Andy Chiodo. And do you know why he was drafted 3 times, Jeff?
Why was Andy Chiodo drafted 3 times? Why was he drafted 3 times? I don't know.
Well, so officially he was only drafted twice. In the 2001 NHL draft, he was taken 166th by the Islanders. And in the 2003 draft, he was taken 199th overall by the Pittsburgh Penguins. However, earlier in that draft, the Islanders draft in 2001, where he got taken there, he was in the crowd, and the Atlanta Thrashers were at their table, and they were going to take a pick, and they'd entered it. They had submitted it, and it had been accepted. And you know how it works in those rounds. You're told, go ahead from your table, and you blurt it out, and they say, okay, next pick. And they were talking about Chiodo because he was on their list, but he wasn't the pick. But when the mic was open and they were told to go, they were talking about Chiodo, so Andy Chiodo's name went over the loudspeakers.
That's so good.
And everybody thought that was the pick. Good. Now, Scott Cruikshank wrote a story in The Athletic. I went back and I referenced, and I went to look for it. Someone sent it to me. And, basically Chiodo had to go down and be told, I'm sorry, we made a mistake, because they'd entered the other player's name. That officially was their pick. Awesome. And so, according to Scott's story, the Thrashers tried to take another make a trade to get another pick to take him. They wanted to do right by him, but the Islanders stepped up and got him. And Dan Marr, who scouted for the Thrashers then, and now does central scouting in the NHL, to his credit, he owned it. He owned it to Chiodo. He owned it to Chiodo's family, the agent. He did interviews about it. He said, look, it was my mistake. I didn't mean to do it. He owned it, and which I always think is the real true thing to do, especially in a hard day. So that is, and by the way, the scout who sent me this said, tell Jeff I'm very disappointed he didn't know this.
Oh, anonymous scout, take a number. I mean, seriously, like go stand in that line over there. It's pretty long. Good for Dan Marr, though. You know the old saying that I always like to talk about on this podcast and elsewhere: when you mess up, fess up, and dress up. Good for Dan Marr. Now, Ryan Smith and Utah. Going back to last year on this podcast when we spoke to Ryan Smith, that was the first sort of popping up onto the radar for a lot of people, for this gentleman who owns the Utah Jazz of the NBA. And this week, he has officially asked the NHL to open up the expansion process. That was met with a favorable response from the NHL and saying things like, we look forward to continuing the discussion. And there was a lot of complimentary things said about the Smith group, leading everyone to believe that this is maybe just a formality now at this point, that somewhere down the road, maybe sooner than later, Utah will have an NHL team, forcing us to rename this podcast and maybe your blog as well. What did you make of the Ryan Smith news this week?
God help us, don't go to 36. Well, first of all, by the way, I do think if and when, because I do think Utah is going to get a team, it's not going to be the Salt Lake City whatevers.
No, it'll be the state.
It'll be the Utah team, yes, because they do it with the basketball team and they're going to do it with the hockey team too. Because there's a question about whether the arena, which they're supposed to get for the 2034 Olympics. I don't know if it's going to be downtown or it's going to be, I don't know what's the proper word to say, the outskirts or the suburbs. But it's going to be a Utah team, not a Salt Lake City team. You know, my feeling on this is the NHL saying, if you're interested in a team, come get us. Come tell us. Because like Ryan Smith doesn't do this without the NHL's approval. There's no way. You have to go from the Mark Chipman book, which is be quiet until we tell you not to be quiet. And that's what Mark Chipman did. So nothing happens without the NHL's approval. So this is a marker. If you're interested in an expansion team in the NHL, start reaching out to us. Because we're getting ready for it. We're planning for it. We want to know what the interest is, and we want it out there that we want to hear submissions of interest. So that's number one. You know, the other thing here too is, and the reason I think that this is real is that we're 3 years into a 7-year deal in the States. Our deal has 2 years left. And one of the things that people look at is, how many U.S. markets are there? Well, in the NFL, there's 32. In Major League Baseball, there's 29. In the NBA, there's 31 or whatever it is, and they're going to expand probably to Vegas and Seattle. And in the NHL, there's 25. And I think they see there is room in the United States for more teams. As much as that makes a lot of you cringe, and I get it, they see it as there are still more spaces here. And I believe this, if the Coyotes leave Arizona, they will sort out their arena situation and they will go back there. Like Arizona, if the Coyotes leave, will not be a forsaken market by the NHL. They will go back there. So that's one thing. It's expansion. We want to know who's out there, and they're 4 years away from a new US TV deal. Follow the money. Now, the other thing is, at the last Board of Governors meeting in December, we heard that the commissioner or the deputy commissioner, whether it was Bettman or Daly or whoever it was, had made it clear to the board that they wanted to know by the end of January or else, basically. Now, I will concede that when it comes to the Arizona Coyotes and their history, this target has moved around. It is not, like, when you think there's a deadline, there's another deadline. But the reason that I think that and I've been using it too, the reason that we're talking about that time is that's what was said at the Board of Governors meeting. And when I asked around if that was accurate, it was not disputed to me. So clearly something was put on the table indicating that. And I know that when the Jets got their team back in 2011, the move didn't happen until June or May or June or whenever it was. It doesn't mean the league wasn't planning it beforehand. You have to put things in motion to get it done.
So then here becomes the question, or one of the questions then. This Ryan Smith appeal to the NHL. I'm imagining, obviously, it puts Utah in motion. As you mentioned, it's one of those like, okay, let's see what you're holding. Show us your cards here. I would imagine that this, if I'm going to pick another market here, puts Atlanta in motion for what many believe to be an inevitability.
Well, I just think that all of these options are going to be out there, right? I think that's what they're kind of looking at. Like, okay, is it going to be Utah? Or is it going to be another market? And if Atlanta's capable, they could be in the mix too. I mean, we'll see. But what this was to me is that it's them saying, we want to know who's out there and who's legit.
Okay. On that, we'll finish up this block. Want to let you know as well, coming up after the Montana's Thought Line, you will hear from Rick Bowness, the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. But quick break, back with your questions and our goofy answers. Don't go anywhere. Listen to the 32 Thoughts podcast ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to the program. Welcome back to the podcast. All week long, we build towards one very specific moment where Elliotte warms up his vocal cords for his grand moment here on the podcast. Here we go. Welcome once again to the Montana's Thought Line, Montana's Barbecue and Bar, Canada's home for barbecue.
Try the ribs, and Dave Maloney will this weekend.
Oh, will he? Do you have a story behind that
Yes.
one? What's the story?
Well, remember the last time he told us that the Rangers were in Toronto, so he wanted to go to a Montana's, but there just wasn't one close enough to downtown. Well, the great people at Montana's heard this, and the Rangers play tonight, and then they go to Ottawa on Saturday, and they will have some ribs ready for him and the Rangers broadcast team.
They are so good, you must count your fingers afterwards, I understand. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca is the email, 1-833-311-3232. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca, 1-833-311-3232. This is a fun one. Marcel from Edmonton, bless you, I love this question. Elliotte, Saturday's surprise firing of Lane Lambert and hiring of Patrick Waugh got me thinking. Are there any restrictions on who NHL teams can hire to coach their team? Only coaching association members maybe? Or would it be possible for a team to get crazy and decide to randomly hire, quote, Marcel from Edmonton off the streets to coach them?
Absolutely, they could do that. No, you don't have to be a member of the coaching association to coach an NHL team. If someone wanted to hire Marcel from Edmonton, they could hire Marcel from Edmonton. Good luck, Marcel.
We'll start putting you on the list of potential candidates for various coaching agencies. Marcel from Edmonton, if that is indeed your real name. Okay, here, I love questions like this. Brent from Hudson. Hey guys, enjoy the pod every week. Just wondering who would get credit for a goal if the defensive centerman drew the puck directly back into his own net, with the opposing centerman not having touched the puck during the face-off. Elliotte?
I found an example of this. October 2011, Boston and Montreal. There is a face-off, and you can find it online, where Thomas Plekanec is taking the draw against Patrice Bergeron, and Plekanec wins the faceoff, and it goes right through Carey Price's legs. It's the first goal of the game. Boston takes a 1-0 lead. Now, this story, young Jeffrey, does have a good ending. Plekanec scored later, this time on the Boston net, to give the Canadiens a 2-1 victory. But the goal was credited to Bergeron, who took the draw against him.
Yes. So you know what the interesting thing about that is, and yes, that is the answer. Even if the player doesn't touch the puck, it's the opposing center who gets credit for the goal. I mean, my thought is, why don't you give the goal to the linesman, for example? Hey, Liney, you got your first career NHL goal. You touched the puck before the other centerman did. No, Elliotte's right. The opposing centerman does get credit for the goal. But you know what the interesting point about that is?
What's that?
They take the loss on the draw. You lose the draw and score a goal. You get credit for a goal, but you also get credit for a face-off
I'll
loss.
take the L. I'll take the goal over the L. I can deal with that.
I think most people would as well. Okay, Carson from Rock Springs. Hey, Wyoming, check you out. Jeff and Elliotte, Carson here, a Sharks fan in Wyoming. I was watching the Sharks-Kings shootout on Monday, and upon watching the replay of Fabian Zetterlund's goal that ended the game, I found myself questioning whether or not the goal should have counted. It looked to me like Zetterlund pulled the puck back a fair amount on his stick handle right before snapping it past Dave Riddick. Everything I've seen and heard says that the puck must always be moving towards the goal line in a shootout attempt. Are there any exceptions to this, such as, quote, being in the middle of a stick handling move or something of the sort? There was no second look by the officials or the Kings. I would imagine they would know what they're doing, and this was a legal move. But the play intrigued me nonetheless, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Keep up the good work. Thanks for the podcast. Cheers. Carson in Wyoming, Elliotte.
Well, first of all, Carson, I would challenge you on one aspect of your question. Never assume that anybody knows what they're doing, because quite frankly, most of us don't.
Fair.
Basically, there was a concession made a few years ago that as long as you're headed towards the net, they're going to let almost anything go on a shootout.
Spinorama.
Because, yeah, that was the thing. Like, the spinorama came up a few years ago, and they had a big argument at a GM meeting. I don't know how big an argument it was, but it was at least a conversation at a GM meeting saying, well, it's a spinorama. The puck's going backwards. Why are we allowing this? And basically the answer was, look, it's entertainment. It's a move to try to score. We're not going to stand in the way of this. Like, I think the person actually would have to stop and skate back towards center ice before they didn't count this stuff.
Yep.
So always assume as long as they're making a move towards the net to try to score, it's going to count.
Wonder if it was it Sam Gagner with the spinorama that started all of this?
He did it, and I think Linus Omark was another one. He had a spinorama move.
Great question. Here's another fun one. Brett from Michigan. Hey, Jeff, Elliotte, and Dom. Do GMs, I love this, do GMs get angry at other GMs who claim their players off waivers? If I waived one of my players and another GM scooped them up, I'd be ticked off. That's my guy to throw away, not yours to take. I wonder if there's any unwritten rules related to this or any animosity built up in the past between GMs. Number one in our hearts. Keep up the great work, guys. I think Brett is thinking about these things like their offer sheets, but it's a funny and good question.
Generally, no, there's no problem with that. I think teams know if they put someone on waivers, there's a risk. So, I mean, look, it doesn't take a lot for a general manager to get mad at something. So I'm sure there have been occasions where a GM was annoyed or upset because they couldn't make a trade or something like that. But if you put a player on waivers, that's the risk.
How many times do you think there are conversations? Certainly there are conversations about, if I put player X on waivers, will you claim him? How many times do you think there are conversations about, maybe Detroit is worried about Philadelphia, or the Kings are worried about Arizona, and there are conversations about, if I put this player on waivers, will you not claim him?
I think those conversations happen periodically. I know that there are teams who put guys on waivers and they sit there and say, this guy might claim him. You know a team is interested and you'll try to trade the person, and sometimes that GM might say, you know what? I can get this player for free. Why should I have to give you a lottery ticket, like a late round draft pick, if I know I can get the player for free? Now, on the other hand, I have seen situations where a player was put on waivers, went unclaimed, but then got traded to a team the next day. I can't remember one off the top of my head, but I remember it had it. And I remember I called the GM and I said, why didn't you just take the player for free? And he said, look at our contract situation. I had no room to add without subtracting. Or he could say, look, for team budget, I couldn't add without subtracting a salary. So all of that can play a part of it. Like, I do think a lot of times when a GM puts someone on waivers, they know if a player is going to get claimed or not, or have a pretty good idea.
We've also seen a player get placed on waivers, clear, and then get placed on waivers again the next day and not clear. Anaheim Columbus looking your direction. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, that was the famous Todd Marchand, Sergei Fedorov deal.
That was indeed. We love telling that story. Brian Burke and Doug McLean. Love you guys. Great questions from everybody this week. Again, the Thought Line numbers 1-833-311-3232. That is the Thought Line. 32 Thoughts at sportsnet.ca. The way to get in by email. Our interview with Rick Bowness, head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, is next. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. Earlier this week, just after the loss against the Boston Bruins and just a day before the loss, overtime style, against the Toronto Maple Leafs, Elliotte and I sat down with the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, Rick Bowness. Rick's one of our favorite guests. That's not exactly a secret. Long-standing coach in the NHL, either as a head coach or an assistant coach. Very thoughtful, always gives wonderful answers. And as we told him as we sat down before we did this interview, Rick, when you're that good the first time around, we ask you back. So here's our second go-round with Rick Bowness, head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. First of all, Rick, thanks so much for joining us again. I'm sure you're pretty sick of talking to me and Elliotte, but when you're a great interview, you keep getting the invite again. You've been one of the big surprise stories, your team, the Winnipeg Jets, one of the big surprise stories of the NHL so far this season. Has the success surprised even you? Or did you think, yeah, we'd be up around the top of the NHL at this point in January?
Well, I'm glad you clarified it was the team that's a surprise and not me. So I'm glad you made that very clear. Not really. I think if you go back to last year, listen, we had to make a lot of changes to the team in a number of ways, but the biggest way was on the ice, the way we were playing. We had to change. We wanted to change the systems. We wanted to become more aggressive. And for a good spell of last year, we were doing that. As the season wore on, and when players get tired, or the heat of the moment in the game, they resort back to what they've done for a long time. So there were times last year that we were going back to the way they were playing 2 years ago, and they weren't going back to the way we were started to play the season. This year, it's a lot easier for us to identify and the players to identify that, okay, we're off our game a little bit. Go back to the way we know how to play, not the way we used to play a couple of years ago. So I knew we had a good team. Listen, we've got world-class goaltenders, so it all starts with that. Hellebuck and LB has stepped in this year. Laurent Brossoit and done a fantastic job. So, and the players have bought in a lot more this year in terms of not so much of it, but consistency of how we want to play. And I think that's led to the success. It's more that the players have completely bought in. They understand how we want to play, and you're seeing a much more consistent effort. There's been very few games. We had one last night in Boston where we walked away and said, well, we weren't very good for a couple of periods. There's been very, very few of those games after the number of games that we played.
You know, I have a couple of follow-ups there, but just talking about the Boston game, there was one thing that happened at the end of the game that I really loved. And I think, to me, it said a lot about your team. So there's just a couple minutes left. Your net is empty. You're down 3-1. I mean, you know you're probably going to lose, barring a miracle. But you guys made it really hard for Boston to score that empty netter. Like, they had about 3 chances before they finally scored, and all 3 of them, you guys chased them down and prevented them from scoring it. And I watched that and I said, this is a team that knows they aren't going to win tonight, but whether it's this record or their overall pride of play, they're saying we're going down until the bitter end. And just watching that said to me a lot about who the Jets are this year.
Yeah, like the first two periods were probably two of the worst we've played all year. Our team is very good. We're near the tops of the leagues in terms of breakouts. And when you break the puck out, you're able to play a lot faster and you're able to play your game a lot better. We struggled for the first couple of periods getting the puck out of our zone, and it wasn't so much Boston as much us. We had control of the puck and we kept turning it over. In the third period, we started to go and we started to play faster and we started to put pressure on them. So even at the end of the game, the guys were still trying to win that game. I know we were down 2 at that point, but they take a lot of pride. They take pride in our goals against, without a doubt. That effort is what you're talking about. But they also, in their minds, they're still in that game, even though we're down 3. We just need one, then we can get a quick one. So, again, it goes back to the buy-in from the players and the consistency of the players. But, again, that effort is there, especially at the end of the game, and I did notice that as well. They were doing everything they could so Boston would not get that fourth goal.
Marchand fought for that one. Like
he did.
Fought for that empty net.
You know that's coming. He's on the ice, and they see an empty net. Look out, we're going to another level here. So get ready for it.
The other thing, too, is there's another team that's taken a big leap this year, and that's Vancouver. And they talk a lot about what you just said there. It's that when things are going badly, we're reverting to what we're supposed to do. So, like, to me, sometimes as an outsider, I think these are the kinds of things that I kind of look at my own world. If I know I'm doing something improperly, I'm like, how do I fix it and how do I commit to that? Both the Canucks and the Jets have talked about how this year it's clicked in to there's a way we have to do things when things go wrong, and we're committed to that. So I guess my dumb question is, why does that take so long to happen? Or why doesn't that happen more? Why does it suddenly click into a team?
Well, in terms of our team, I can't speak for the Canucks, but they played a certain way for 5 or 6 years. Those systems become ingrained in you, and that's how you play. And your instincts take over and say, that's how we're going to play. So when we come in and we want to play more aggressive style all over the ice, it's not always going to go your way. So now you fall back on what we used to be able to do, and it contradicts the way we wanted to play. So this year, because we've harped on it all of last year, and the one thing we keep saying is we know what we look like. We know what we're supposed to look like when we're playing well. We know what that looks like. We know who we are. So last year, there was times it looked a little confused. This year, it's easier to identify, okay, this is not what we look like. This is not what we're supposed to do. The players see it. We see it. And when we talk about it, they understand it a lot clearer. It's in their minds now. They know how we look, how we're supposed to look when we're playing well, as opposed to, okay, well, we used to do this. But you got to get that out of there. And mentally, it's not the physical side of the game, it's the mental side of the game. You go back to your natural habits, which made you feel comfortable when the game is heated up and things aren't going well. But now those instincts fall back into the way we want to play. Okay, we're not aggressive enough here. Let's get going. Some teams is more, okay, we got to sit back a little bit more. But our team is we're better when we're playing a much more aggressive style all over the ice. So they see it when we're sitting back, or we're not breaking the puck out, or we're not putting a lot of pressure on them. So they can see it now. They know what we look like when we're playing well.
Do you need results to make that work? Like if this team was 25th, would that be happening?
But what results are you talking about? The way you play the game, or the end result, the wins?
That's a good. You can answer that question better than I can.
Because we take care of the process, and the end result will take care of itself. We don't base everything on the win. The wins will come if we do all these things well. If we play our Winnipeg Jet hockey, we know the wins will come. But at the end of we're not always saying we got to win, we got to win, we got to win. We say we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, and that is a daily process. We take over practices and video. We don't talk about our place in the standings. We've never talked about that streak. The players, we have never brought it up. We've never said we're in first, second, third, fourth. We've never brought that up. What we talk about every day is the process and what a Winnipeg Jet game looks like, what a Winnipeg Jet player looks like fitting into that system.
You know, you don't have success like that unless there is trust. And one of the things that I took away from our last conversation, you were talking about Victor Hedman and the way to unlock Victor Hedman, who was, deeply skeptical of pretty much everybody around him. And you told Elliotte and I that one of the things you did is you talked to him about everything other than hockey. You would go for walks and not talk about hockey. Every day it's a conversation not about hockey, and it built up a trust between the two of you in Tampa. When you took over in Winnipeg, and maybe at the beginning of this season too, who was it important for you to get that buy-in from, and how did you do it? Like, were there a couple of players that said, I need these guys or this guy to be on the same level here with me?
I talked to all the players last year when I first got the job, but yeah, there's the key guys you have to go to. It started with me with Connor Hellebuyck. You got, okay, you're the goalie. What are you seeing in front of you? What do we need to change to make your life a lot easier? Then you have to go to the stars, and it was Mark Morrissey and Mark Scheifele and Kyle Connor, and you got to go to those guys. But you also have to include everyone else. Everyone has to feel they're part of it. Like their roles are all different, but their status has to be the same in terms of what their importance to the team, regardless if it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes. So one of the things which we try to do is do that, make sure we're getting everyone's input. Everyone feels they have a voice and that we are listening to them. But obviously it's the key guys you've got to get to buy in. If they don't buy in, the rest of the guys aren't buying in. But this year you're watching, our players are seeing Kyle Connor back check hard, Mark Scheifele back check hard, taking hits to make plays. So that's so last year for me, it started with the key guys, but it's also touching base with every one of them to get their opinion, so that they all feel that they're part of the process, part of the solution moving forward. But again, their status, they all have to feel that their role on the team is important. Minutes are different, roles are different. Status has to be the same.
What was the thing that was the most impactful that any of them told you?
I would go back to Connor Hellebuyck, that all the great A's that they were giving up in front of him. He had a heavy workload, not just in terms of games and minutes, but the shot volume and the quality of the shot. So we started looking at that. But what I had done before, even speaking to them, was watch a couple of their games and look at their analytics and that just jumped right out at you. Okay, we got to cut down on these slot chances against. We got to cut down these rush chances against. Yes, this team can score, but you're not going to win you're not going to win the playoffs going 5-4, 6-5. It's not. So you've got to tighten it up. And but it was more a Hellebuyck right off the bat that said, we're giving up a lot of chances right in front of me, and the rebounds and chances off the rush, we'd like to clear that up. So what he said and what I saw in the video kind of matched up with each other. Talking to Josh Morrissey, the D weren't involved in the rush enough. They weren't involved enough. So you watch the video. Okay, they played it. Look, they had great success. So I'm not knocking it. It was just it's different ways to play the game. Okay, we're going to get you more involved. Because I remember coaching against Mo and saying, "Wow, this kid's an elite skater. He's an elite puck carrier. We got to watch him when he's on the ice." And I wanted to turn him loose. And so that means you got to let all the D go. You can't say, well, Mo's going, you're not. So now you got to get all the D to buy into that. But it started on that part of the game started with Josh Morrissey.
So Hellebuyck himself, when did you know that he was staying?
When he signed the contract.
But you had to have a point where you realized, because Scheifele, I can only speak for myself, Scheifele was out of the blue, but there was a sense later in the summer that Hellebuyck's mind had changed and that he was going to stay.
I think he loved the trade we made with LA. Okay, we have depth now. Talking to Connor at the end of the year, it was, I want to win the Stanley Cup. It wasn't, we had a good conversation. It was never, I want to get this 8 years, I want to get this amount of money. That never, ever came up. All he kept repeating, I want to win the Stanley Cup. I don't care about the Vezina. I don't care about the money. I want to win a Stanley Cup. So I think when Chevy made that trade with LA and he saw the good pieces that we were bringing in, he said, okay, this team's committed to winning. And I think that changed his mind up as well.
Vilardi, one of the pieces coming back. Thoughts of him before he became a Jet and thoughts of him as a Jet now?
Didn't know him all that well, honestly. He was hurt a lot for a couple of years, and I think there was a couple of games we played them he didn't play, so I really didn't know a lot about him. I hear good things about him, right? So you got to see it on the ice in training camp, and okay, he had been hurt, so it took a little while to get him going in training camp. Then we said, wow, this guy is unreal around the net. He does some great things on the boards. Then he gets hurt. So we still think there's more from Gabe. We got to try to keep him healthy. The one disappointing part of our season for us in our power play is that we've never had the opportunity to run 10 games with Mark, Kyle Connor, and Gabe on the same power play. One of them has been hurt all year. And that's really because we saw it during the preseason. We saw it earlier. Wow, there's some chemistry there on the power play. And then Kyle went down, and then Gabe went down. So we were anxious to get those three back healthy, get them playing together as line, and see what they can do on the power play, because clearly our power play needs a lot of work. But in fairness, we've never had those three guys for a long period of time on the power play. So we're anxious to see what that looks like, because Gabe, to answer your question again, very good in the power play, very good around the net. He's got great hands for a big man, and he hangs on to pucks, and he makes plays, and he takes puck to the net. So we really missed his presence. He showed us what he can do when he's healthy, and now the challenge is to keep him healthy and also to keep Mark and Casey healthy and give them a chance to run and get the chemistry, because they still haven't played enough together over the years, and here we are this far into the season. They still haven't played a lot of time together as a threesome.
Go ahead, bud.
You're both pointing at each other.
I was going to jump in, and then I defer to Elliotte. So you're not going to have this kind of success if there are selfish plays and selfish hockey plays. I mean, you've made that clear with all of your stops. The old saying, the offside is the most selfish play in the NHL. I think slow line changes are also a pretty selfish thing too. What do you
zone turnovers hanging out?
Oh, we can keep. Well, that's what I want to ask you.
Keep going.
What do you is it the offside? What do you consider the laziest, most selfish thing a player can do?
Long
on
shifts.
The ice?
Long shifts, just staying out there, hoping for one more chance to go for a rush, because that's when the bad line changes. That's when the bad, you're spending too much time in your D zone. That's when the turnover started. When players start taking extra long shifts to go, we may have a chance to score here, that leads to so many problems. It also disrupts the line flow and the chemistry of your next lines, because somebody might be out there for a minute, and the next two guys are sitting there waiting to go, and now their line mate's out there. He's coming off. Now we're going out with someone new. So for me, I always put a lot of focus on the line shifts and making sure that they're not extended, because even last night in Boston, we had two shifts in our zone that were probably a minute and a half, and it was we just didn't get the puck out. So now we're spending time in our zone, but we had two different guys from two different lines out there. Well, it screws up the rotation, and someone's missing ice time while they're out there that long. So for me, I always kind of focus on the length of the shifts, and if I see a guy trying to go, I'm a little tired, but we might get a chance here, I'm going, that stuff drives me nuts.
I'm going to follow up with a question that I know is going to drive Elliotte crazy, but I'm so fascinated with the minutia of this. And Scotty Bowman used to do this with the Habs. I don't know if you do it with Winnipeg or you've done it with any of your other stops. Do you practice line changes?
Yes, we warm up line changes. So we try to warm up every practice with something that's actually happening in the game. So we make a game out of it, and you're not allowed to change until the puck is in deep, and then you walk through how you want to change. But yeah, we'll have a warm up game, a pre-game practice or a pre-practice warm up just on line changes. So yeah, we do.
That's actually...
I love that.
That's not as bad as some of the other questions you've asked over the years. I'll say that much. I wanted to ask a little bit more kind of about that kind of a thing. And what I was going to ask you was, want you to name a player you played with and a player you coached who was the worst either for the long shifts or the bad line changes.
That's a tough question. Now, I haven't played in a long time. You're really
I know you have the mind of a coach. There's someone you're like, this guy.
But some players, hang on. I know some players were allowed to have the 2-minute shift.
Yeah, like Phil Esposito could keep play for 3 minutes. He was scoring 76 goals, but you had to have guys like that.
The game has changed so much now.
Yeah,
it's so much faster.
Yeah,
that the guys who do stay out there a little bit long, it clearly shows. I'm not going to name names. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to get into that. But
what does the name rhyme with?
Yeah,
I'd have to think. Honestly, because I'm harping on them.
There had to be someone in Tampa or Dallas that was like or all those years you coached, because you've coached a long time, who had to be the worst line changer you ever dealt with.
There's been a couple. We're not going to call them out here.
What team are we talking about here? So I can go through hockey.
Right hand shot, left hand shot.
No, but what the other issue on that is their teammates see it. Right, and that's
yes.
We get frustrated. Their teammates get frustrated with them as well. And we did have an incident last year on our bench between periods, or not on the bench, but on our team in between periods, that somebody went after someone else about the long shift because he's missing minutes and he's missing time with his line mates. So that was addressed with the players, because after I had addressed it on the bench, it was also followed up in the locker room, which is good because now your players are taking ownership of how you want to play.
Actually, I'm curious about that. Because players, like, we get mad at each other, like broadcasters get mad at each other over airtime sometimes.
So his questions are more intelligent than yours?
He doesn't know when to wrap up a question. Everything is.
But so
4 or 5
when do you get involved? Like when players are having a disagreement about something, when do coaches get involved?
We would let it settle down and then pull them both aside and talk to them, which I did after the game. This is what happened. First of all, I responded, and then the player that was sitting on the bench waiting to get out there responded, and then you got to let the emotions calm down a little bit, and then I dealt with it right after the game, because you don't let those things dwell. And I brought them both, not sit together, but one-on-one, and said, "This is what happened. I'll take care of it. And this is what happened. We'll fix this." So because I addressed it first on the bench, and the player followed up on it, and then so I just had to clean it up.
Let me ask you, on a similar vein then, who was the best player at controlling the room or being able to make other players accountable from all your stops?
Ray Bourque. He was unreal. He really was. In Boston, and I only had him for the 1 year, but it was unreal how he would take over the control of the game. And he didn't say too much on the bench, but in the locker room, he'd walk in and there was a presence about Ray, and he would just settle things right down and got everything straightened out. In Vancouver, like, we had Kevin and we had Kess and we had the twins. Like, we had great leadership in there, and they would settle things down.
If they weren't fighting with each other.
Oh, yeah. Once you separate them, they were great. But I've been fortunate with that part of the game that, Stamkos and Victor and Cooch and those guys, the thing they all have in common, they're great competitors, and they want to win. And if they say things that are going on that is affecting their team's ability to win, they're not afraid to speak up. And in whatever tone they wanted, the Twins never got excited. They would just settle things down. Like, there were many times where teams would take a run at the Twins and try to physically intimidate them. And they'd come in, "Don't worry about it, we'll deal with it." And it was unreal. On the bench, "Don't worry about it, we'll deal with it." And they did. And they just kept playing. You couldn't intimidate them. Other guys would come in and did a little more vocal. Like different guys would be a little more vocal to get things going. Ray was exceptional.
Was there ever, I'm curious, without naming the player, obviously, but was there ever a time you had to discipline a player privately very seriously? And how often does something like that happen?
Oh, that happens. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Whether it's a shift length, undisciplined penalties, practice habits. So, you've got to challenge them. But it all starts with your ability to build that trust that we were talking about earlier. You got to build that first, so that when you're going to address those issues, the player still knows you have his best interest at heart and the team's best interest at heart. So it goes back to building the trust with the communication, open communication with all your players, so that when you do sit in those situations, and you have to address them. You can't let them grow. Like, little problems can become big problems in a hurry if you don't address it right away. So I think it goes back to that. But you see something, you got to address it right away. You don't like it. And again, you're having conversations with these guys, even though they trust you and everything. They don't like to hear some of the things you're telling them, but you can't be afraid of those conversations either. And you got to look them in the eye. You can't be, looking up in the ceiling, look at the floor. You got to look them in the eye. This is what I don't like. This is what we got to work together to clean up, and you move on.
Well, you're really not going to like this question, but you have kids now that could be your grandchildren.
Yeah, I know.
So I'm wondering.
I know. It doesn't seem that long ago, and I said to Judy, we're old enough to be these guys' parents. Now the other was saying, we're old enough to be their grandparents now. So, yeah, I get it. So where are we going with this?
Well, so the thing is, like, you've got Perfetti, who's a really talented guy, and, his minutes were down early in the year. And I, like, as a viewer, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. I understand. But, like, this generation, they're different. And so has it been harder? Can you be more blunt with a Scheifele, who's a little bit older, or a Wheeler, who was a lot older, as opposed to a Perfetti? Do you have to deliver your message differently?
Yes. You're right on with that. Absolutely. And I talked to Cole a lot. We've got a good rapport. And when he doesn't play enough, I'm the first guy to grab him, Cole, I'm trying to get you more ice time, but this is what happened. There was penalties, and you lose your shifts here because your line mates are killing. You got to understand whether his minutes are down. It's got nothing to do with your play, and sometimes that happens, right? He's losing ice time because we'll send out the first power play. Early in the year, he was on the second unit, and that's out there for a minute and a half, and he only gets 30 seconds. So when his minutes aren't where I need to think they should be, I'm the first one to go up and explain to him, and he's great with it. He understands defensively, right, and the battles, and right, he's got to understand how to manage the game a little bit better up here. So these are all growing pains that you go through with, but I make sure because it is cold, and those aren't harsh conversations. Those are like you and I are talking right now. Here's what's going on, and he's a very intelligent kid, and he cares. But yeah, they're a little more sensitive today than some of the older guys. There's no question. But you've got to be aware of that when you're dealing with them. But that still doesn't. There's times where you got to let the passion, you got to let the emotion take over, and that's where I'm not very good.
Well, you know what one coach said to me? He says, one coach, he got mad at me once, and he was swearing up and down at me on a phone call. And then when we all sorted out, he called me like a few months later and he said, I was worried you were going to make a big deal about the fact that I was swearing at you and calling at you names. I said, that stuff doesn't really bother me. And he said, that's good because you can't really do that in a workplace environment anymore. So I wonder about the way you could talk to even Hedman 10, 15 years ago and the way you talk to, say, Perfetti now. You've got to be so much more careful about how you talk.
Yeah. It all depends on the individual. Yeah, so that's why you got to get to know them.
Yeah.
Can he handle it? Me being hard on him, right? Because I was really hard on Robo and Rupe in Dallas their first year. I was hard on them, but they could take it, right? And eventually I said, okay, I've been hard on you, let you play now. So I haven't had that issue in Winnipeg yet. So, but you got to know the person. You got to know how far you can push them until they've had enough. So now we got to back off a little bit and just ease off a little bit and show them that you still trust them, even though you're hard on them.
Let me pick up on the Perfetti conversation. So how then, knowing that minutes are at a premium on this team, it's a high-end team up around the top of the NHL, how do you get this young player to the next level, knowing that minutes are going to be hard for him?
Well, you got to understand our team as well, because when we were really rolling good, we had Scheif and KC. There's your left winger. He's got to play for 18, 20 minutes. And Lowry, Niedermeyer, and Niederreiter, and Appleby, they were a dominant line. They got to get their minutes too. And you got to give your fourth line some minutes so they're in the game, they're feeling part of it. So there's only so many minutes that you can give out. And if you're going to give him more minutes, you're taking minutes away from the top guys. And we're a little bit ahead of them right now because of their experience and their roles on the team, because we ran Adams' line against all the top lines. You got to get Scheifele's line out there a lot. So there's only so many minutes. And sometimes he gets caught in that, Cole does. But he understands that now. He's starting to understand that. And, late in the game, sometimes we'll put Morgan Barron out on the left wing. And he's got to understand that Morgan has to feel part of this team as well. You get your power play time and you're getting it with the top players. You got to make the other guys feel part of what they're doing and the success we're having. So he's starting to understand all of that. He's a really good kid. He's a really good teammate. He's starting to understand what it takes to be a good teammate. And sometimes you let the other guys go and you let them feel their importance. But again, you start taking minutes away from Kyle Connor, who's having a great year, and the Adam line was dominant for months. You can't start taking minutes away from them because they're playing so well and we're winning. If we weren't winning, there's a whole other discussion. But when you're winning and those guys are making the difference in a lot of games, sometimes you just got to live with the fact you're missing a couple of minutes. It's not you're missing 10. You're missing a couple of shifts here and there.
I'm going to ask you to answer this, not with your head, but with your heart. Let's see if we can do this. When I say Minnesota Wild, what do you think?
I think, I know. That's a decent one. No.
Not your head, but your heart. Come on, Rick.
Yeah, okay. So, when I saw that develop, my first thought is we're going into the playoffs, and we do not want to lose Adam Lowry. So there was 20 seconds ago, whatever's left in the game, and now Adam's fighting Ryan Reeves. So we're not going to talk about the significance of Reeves on their team. All I know is we're going into the playoffs now, and that was the game that clinched it for us. And Adam gets into a fight and breaks his hand or gets hurt. Now we're going into the playoffs without Adam Lowry. So what upset me most about that was all of that we can't afford to lose Adam Lowry. I'm mad because there's a chance that we could lose Adam Lowry. And Adam and I talked about that after the game right away. You get in those situations. Sometimes you got to pull back, but that's not Adam, right? That's not his personality. Somebody challenges him, he's gonna respond. So I was more upset of the fear of losing Adam going into the playoffs, understanding how important he was to our team, penalty killing, physicality, his presence in the room, presence on the ice. So I got a little upset at that.
So that's kind of carried over into this season with Hartman and Perfetti, and we spent a lot of time, all of us, talking about that. And this, if people didn't know that Winnipeg and Minnesota have a pretty heated rivalry, they do now. So when you think about Minnesota now, and there's another game that's on the horizon here between these two teams. If you want to speak from your heart and sell some hockey tickets, go for it. But what do you think of Minnesota now?
I mean, listen, players take care of things on the ice. Coaches don't. They take care of things on the ice, and you got to stay out of their way. Do I wish that whole Perfetti thing had to stay out of the media? Yeah. I do. But the players will take care of those things on the ice. And we're a family in Winnipeg, and we're going to stick up for each other all the time. But there's things happen out there that players are trying to stick up for their teammates on the other side as well. That's part of pro hockey, man. You got to live with it. Do we like to keep those things away from you guys? Absolutely we do. But if we didn't, and that's fine, we'll deal with it. We know it. Cole and I talked about just keep it out of the media. The players will take care of that stuff on the ice. And there's things that happen out there. And again, coaches have to stay out of those things. Let the players deal with it. That's their thing. And that's what we do.
Who do your players hate more, Minnesota, Toronto, or is there a third option?
I would say Minnesota the most. We don't play Toronto enough, so we only play them twice a year.
I know, but some of those games have gotten really
they've gotten real rough. Yeah, because again, we understand the publicity the Leafs get. We get it. We're in a smaller market. We get it, but we want to be heard of. We're a good team.
Yes, you are.
We're a good team, and we've been a good team for a long time. Mm-hmm. So there's some pride in there that we want to be recognized as well.
I did. You talked a little bit about the Dubois trade last year, about how that changed for Elliotte. Just there's a couple things you said in the last few months that really stuck out with me. Obviously, one was the end of the playoff series last year. But when Scheifele signed this year, you talked about how everybody in this room wants to be here. And I just want to, last summer, from that comment at the end of Vegas to where you got on the season with Elliotte and Scheifele signing, what happened behind the scenes to make this a happier place?
Well, okay, that's fair. But Doobie made it very clear that he wasn't going to sign a long term.
Yep.
So you start talking about that a lot. The players know he doesn't. He wants out of here at some point. So. And when that's dealt with the way Chevy dealt with it, and we're bringing in good pieces, it goes back to Connor. We're committed to winning here. Everyone that's here wants to be here. To me, and then that's just, again, it's all about the buy-in, right? You can't have one or two guys, I want to get traded, I want to be out of here, and say, okay, we're all in. So when there's one or two guys in the room that don't want to be there, you've again, like Doobie made it. I'm not criticizing Doobie. He didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be there. That's his call. He's an athlete. He's got to take care of his career. So Pierre got what he wanted, and we got what we wanted. We got some good pieces, and we got guys that want to be in Winnipeg. So Pierre-Luc, good for him. Got exactly what he wanted. He got a big contract, went to a big market, and that's where he wanted to go. Good for him. Short career. We got what we wanted. We got guys who want to be in Winnipeg and are very proud to be a Winnipeg Jet. And the player, again, it goes back to that locker room. Players feel that. And the camaraderie becomes a lot tighter when they all know we're all in. They all want to be here. The camaraderie and their chemistry in the room becomes a lot tighter.
Mm. Well, just Scheifele, how much do you think it took a load off his shoulders when all that got sorted out?
I think a lot. Listen, Mark, one thing about Mark that people don't see is how hard he works away from the games. This man is 100% committed to his profession. He does everything he can to prepare. He's on the ice early working with his skills. He's working out all the time. The diet. He looks after himself better than anyone I've ever been around. He is totally committed to his career, his profession, and that rubs off on the players. This guy works very, very hard every day. And so the things that you're seeing, a more complete player from Mark this year, there's no question. But what you're not seeing is all those other things that he's doing behind the scenes that really earn the respect of the coaches, earn the respect of his teammates, how hard he works, and how committed he is to his profession.
Who on your team do you think could be a coach?
You guys are throwing these tough questions at me. Dylan DeBello, very smart guy. Brendan Dillon, very smart guy. Neil P. Young, yeah. They see the game, they understand the game, and they love the game. I could see them getting into coaching for sure.
Mm-hmm. Do you find now, like the secret's out about the Winnipeg Jets and has been out for a while, do you find that you're consistently, we started this conversation off by talking about Monday's game against the Boston Bruins. Do you find that you're getting every team's A game now?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. We went into Ottawa on Saturday, and it was that 3 o'clock hockey day in Canada. And I spoke to the coaches after, and they said that's the best game they played all year. And that's both coaching staffs coming. And the players, like they were so dialed in on us and so committed to playing solid defense. Their structure was really good. Their commitment to details was really good. So just talking to their coaching staff. So we went in going, okay, this team is a little loose here, a little loose there. We're telling our players, but they weren't, right? So there's an example of, okay, they got blown out on a Tuesday by Colorado. They beat Montreal, but Montreal had played the night before on a Thursday. Now we're coming in on a Friday, on a Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. They were dialed in, and you could tell from right off the gate, face-offs, details, they knew when to back off. They were very aggressive in their own zone, and yeah. So now we got to go in and say, okay, guys, we got a whole different animal here than what we thought we were going to get. They're really disciplined. They're coming hard. They're making us work. They're working really hard. So we got to make some adjustments here. And the coaches clarified it for us after the game. That's by far, and that was their players telling them that's the best game we put together all year. So yeah, we get everyone's A game. When you're coming in where it's like Vancouver and Boston, you're playing the top teams, you better be ready or you'll get embarrassed.
I just wanted to ask about Judy Bowness. How's she doing?
She's doing much better, thanks, and she hates the attention, as I told you. But no, thank you for asking. She did have a shoulder surgery last week, and she's recovering from that. But she is doing much better. Thank you very much for asking.
Yeah, I don't want to pry, but the only thing I wanted to ask was, at any point did you think that maybe you would have to step away from coaching?
Well, when it was happening, no. But yeah, I spent that night with her at the hospital, and there's times there like, if she doesn't come out of this, what are we going to do, right? So it never came to the point where I'm done. It didn't certainly get to that point, but I'm sitting there and she's resting and everything else all night, and it crossed your mind that if she doesn't come out of this, if she's not coming around, I'm not going back. It never got to that point, but the thoughts, well, that could possibly happen at some point here. It all depends on her.
I have two last ones. Number one, you have a wonderful family, aside from yourself and Judy, but your kids and your grandkids. Ryan looks like he's got a very bright future in this game.
You know what, Ryan, he's smarter than his father because he's in management. Well, I'll tell you about Ryan. So when they were little kids and I always brought them to the rink, my oldest son, Ricky, he's the brains of the family. So Ricky would go on the computer and Ryan would be in with the trainers doing the laundry and washing the towels and hanging up equipment. And he'd come in and say, Dad, why did so-and-so change his gloves? Like, I would have no idea, but he noticed all those things. And he always hung out with the trainers. He loved being in the room. He loved the fact that they actually gave him a piece of pizza for lunch to help him. He was 8 nights. But so Ryan's always had the passion for the game. Loves being around the game. So he played junior in Brampton, then he went to St. Mary's. But the whole thing with Ryan was that when he was being drafted into the OHL, I kept telling teams, no. Because I don't have a college degree, and my kids are getting a college degree. And so University of Maine, we're going to offer him a full ride. I said, Ryan, I don't have a degree. You're getting one. He said, but Dad, I'm a junior hockey player. I'm not a college hockey player. And he was right about that. So Stan Butler, with Brampton at the time, drafted him. But I made it very clear with Stan, okay, Stan, if you draft him, he has to keep his marks up in school. And the day the marks drop and he's failing a grade, you're going to bench him. You're not going to play him until those marks go back up. So you want to draft him. These are my rules, and Ryan's going to buy into this. So we let him go to Brampton. He kept his marks up, and he did get a college degree at St. Mary's in finance. Played a year in the East Coast League and realized, okay, get my brains knocked out for $500 a week. Now let's move on here. So, but he's always had a tremendous passion for the game. I use him like, Ryan, do you know this player? Like, he knows players around the league better than I do now because of his scouting with Winnipeg and with Pittsburgh. So I'm very, very proud of him. And I'm very, very happy for him. He's worked hard and he's going to get rewarded. But the best thing about Ryan and all our kids, we said, do whatever you do. When you wake up, I want you to love what you're doing, going to see that day, going to do that day. Ryan loves hockey as much as I do, and I'm very proud of him.
Did the jacket make the trip?
No. Jacket, haven't seen that for a while.
Has been retired?
Yeah, it's been retired.
Let me finish up with a theoretical question here. I'm curious about this. I ask every coach that I can this now. In the PWHL, they have a new rule. It's called the jailbreak. And what happens is if you're killing a penalty and you score shorthanded, the penalty is over. The player comes out of the box. Would that affect the way you coach your special teams either way, whether you're on the power play or you're shorthanded, knowing that if you score shorthanded or you're scored against shorthanded, the player's coming out of the box? Would that affect how you coach?
No. I don't think so. Probably because I've coached for a long, doing it one way. That would be a tough adjustment. No, I don't think so. I think your main objective when you're out there killing the penalty is to kill the penalty. You're not trying to score. And players make a lot of money killing penalties. They do, winning faceoffs, killing penalties. That's what they're paid to do. So their main job is to go out there and kill that penalty. Now, to go out there and score, I think you'd looking at different personnel. You'd be looking, you'd have to change. You would have to change the whole way you do it. But maybe it's because the sport's so ingrained in the way I've coached for so long. But I still believe I like the way it is right now. I do. So you get players who are exceptional at killing penalties, and they're blocking shots, and they're winning faceoffs, and they're making big money for doing that. And good for them; they've earned it.
One more coaching question: do you like the way 3-on-3 is played right now?
I know there's been a lot of discussion about that. Yes, I do. I mean, you're trying to hang out of the puck, you're trying to tire the team out, and you're trying to score. And you'd like to see us do more attacking because that's when it opens up. When you go down on a 2-on-1, you don't score. You automatically come back on a 2-on-1. Now you got to bust back. So it's that first team that takes the initiative, make that 2-on-1, try to get the odd man. But, teams have figured it out. You got to get up ice with them and you got to stay with them. And I know there's overtimes that very little happens. We had a great overtime in Ottawa. So that's my last example of it. They had a chance. We had chances. It was an exciting overtime for the fans, and the players enjoy that.
You liked it because you won.
Well, I liked it because we won, but it was exciting for the fans because the fans would get so much into it. But that was an exciting overtime, and I've watched some others since discussion comes up, and I'm watching overtimes at night. Now I get what they're understanding. Well, nothing's happening. Somebody eventually has to take a gamble and open it up, and then it goes end to end.
This has been great. Thanks so much for parking time with us. Always appreciate it, Rick.
Always a pleasure talking to you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that's Rick Bowness, head coach of the Winnipeg Jets. And although you're getting this podcast on Friday, Thursday was his birthday. Happy belated, Rick Bowness. Big weekend once again, as always, for Hockey Night in Canada. A number of intriguing games. The New York Rangers face off against the Ottawa Senators. The Maple Leafs face off once again against Rick Bowness's Winnipeg Jets, this time in Manitoba. It's the Habs and the Pens, the Hawks and the Flames, the Columbus Blue Jackets against the team that has the best helmets, whether it's blue chrome, whether it's matte black, the Vancouver Canucks. On behalf of Dom Schumati and Elliotte Friedman, Merrick signing off. We will join you again on Monday for the next edition of 32 Thoughts, the podcast. Have a great weekend.